All right, let's jump right into this explainer because today we're completely flipping the script on how women approach negotiation. We're stepping away from those rigid textbook tactics and looking at something so much deeper, real lasting transformation. Because let's be honest, when it comes to advocating for ourselves, we don't just need another list of phrases to memorize, right? We need a fundamental shift in how we view our own value, our identity, and our emotional intelligence at the table. So let's explore how to negotiate from a place of genuine strategic influence. So, how many times have you walked away from a conversation, got to your car, or slammed your laptop shut, and immediately thought, why didn't I say something? Oh, it is an all too familiar feeling. You absolutely knew what you wanted going in, you had the data, you did the prep, and yet, the moment just passed you by. You walked away with that heavy, sinking feeling of regret. Or maybe even worse, you find yourself agonizing over the second question. Why did I agree to that? Maybe it was a huge salary negotiation where you just accepted the first number they threw out, or a discussion about a promotion that somehow got pushed back again. Maybe it was a tense conversation with your boss, a tricky client, or even setting boundaries in your personal life. You knew exactly what you deserved, but somehow you just settled for less. Now, I need you to hear this. You did not settle because you lacked capability. Actually, studies consistently show women are fierce advocates for other people, but we kind of freeze up when advocating for ourselves. Look, you're brilliant, you're highly educated, you have an incredible track record. You aren't losing these negotiations because you aren't smart enough. You're settling because, honestly, no one ever taught you how to negotiate without feeling guilty or afraid or misunderstood. You just haven't been given the right emotional tools for those highly charged moments. Which brings us to part one. Finding your authentic voice. To really grasp this paradigm shift, we have to look at the woman behind this methodology, Yvette Durazo. Growing up as a young Latina navigating two completely different cultures, she learned super early on that finding your voice is not always easy. She became a young mother while relentlessly pursuing her education, built a massively successful consulting practice from absolute scratch, and today, she's a mediator and executive coach, advising Fortune 500 leaders, government agencies, and nonprofits all over the world. So she's teaching from lived, hard-earned experience. And throughout all those years of coaching global executives, one undeniable pattern kept showing up time and time again. Brilliant, highly successful women are still undervaluing themselves at the table. It literally didn't matter how high up the corporate ladder they climbed or how many degrees they held. This core issue was always there. They were missing out simply because they didn't understand the invisible dynamics of conflict, power, and emotion. This leads us right into section 2, the tactics trap. You see, when we realize we need help with negotiation, we usually hunt for a quick fix, right? Like a script. Traditional courses teach sheer tactics. They tell you what to say, what exact questions to ask, and they basically just say, hey, negotiate harder. But real negotiation, it's all about the invisible dynamics. It's understanding yourself, managing your own swirling emotions, reading the energy in the room, spotting hidden interests, and building deep, genuine trust. It's knowing exactly when to push forward and exactly when to pause. Because here's the secret. The best negotiators do not win by overpowering people. They create agreements that people actually want to honor. Overpowering someone or backing them into a corner until they finally cave is a totally different and honestly, way less effective skill than collaborating to build a solid mutual agreement. Think about it. When you force a yes, you just breed resentment. But when you create a true agreement, you build a lasting partnership. So, how do we actually get there? We enter section 3, mastering your conflict IQ. Yvette developed this specific methodology, conflict IQ, for one huge reason. Traditional training just wasn't enough to help women win. It's essentially the ability to understand and navigate those tricky and visible dynamics behind conflict, influence, emotions, and power. It's all about developing the emotional intelligence to stay incredibly grounded and strategic, even when the conversation gets really difficult or the stakes are sky high. Once you master your conflict IQ, you step into phase 4, the transformation. This transformation happens in 3 really distinct shifts. First, you deeply, truly internalize your own worth. And wow, when you understand your value, everything shifts. Which leads right to step 2. You stop asking for permission. You communicate totally differently. You lead differently. And finally, step 3, you start creating your own opportunities. You're no longer sitting around waiting for someone to hand you what you deserve. You're out there strategically and confidently building the life and career you actually want. Now, if you've ever looked at a master negotiator and thought to yourself, well, I just don't have that personality, I want you to let that go right now. Confidence isn't something you're just magically born with. It's something you build. Strategic influence, emotional intelligence, authentic confidence, these are just muscles. And like any muscle, with the right framework and a little bit of practice, you can absolutely develop them over time. Which brings us to our final section, claiming your seat. When you start applying these principles, which are the absolute core of the Women's Negotiation Academy methodology, the outcomes are incredibly tangible. You learn to negotiate your salary with total confidence. You build a commanding executive presence. You figure out how to handle those stomach-turning, difficult conversations with absolute grace. You advocate for yourself without an ounce of guilt. And you master conflict way before it becomes costly to your career or your relationships. It's the whole shebang of ultimate leadership and clarity. I want to leave you with Yvette Durazo's signature message, and it's a real game changer. Negotiation isn't about winning over someone else. It's about no longer negotiating away your own value. Let that really sink in for a second. Every single woman deserves a seat at the table, and when there isn't one, well, you now know that you have the power to create it yourself. So my final question for you today is this. When you walk into your next high-stakes conversation, are you going to be fighting for a win or finally claiming the value you already possess?